Stanford University.
The Human Experience. Inside the Humanities at Stanford University. humanexperience.stanford.edu.
This is a really exciting moment. So it's exciting for me because I'm really thrilled and honored to be back here on campus and to be taking part in such a thought-provoking event. But it's an exciting moment more generally because technology has never been more interesting to non-technologists than it is right now. It's never been more interesting or more influential or more influenceable. So over the past few years, there's a whole slew of new technologies, publishing systems, online video, social media, crowdsourcing engines that have the power to amplify our work so powerfully in ways that we never could have imagined 5 or 10 years ago. Now, from my vantage point at TED, I've really watched these changes with wonder. And I wanted to share with you today some of the key lessons we've learned that I thought would be the most interesting. But I'm going to start with an exciting moment in the prehistory. So I don't usually talk about myself when I tell the story of TED, but Anais encouraged me to share a little bit of my own history just because so much of my life's work, bridging media and technology, really started here. So as she mentioned, I was an undergraduate here in the early 90s, and even back then, before the dot-com era, the border between Stanford and Silicon Valley was very permeable, so tech news traveled very fast on the campus. So, and I still remember the day in 1991 when Apple first announced that it was releasing QuickTime. So this was the technology that allowed you to watch video on a personal computer for the first time, which actually seems sort of amazing that we didn't used to be able to watch video on a personal computer, but we couldn't. And I was news editor of the Daily at the time, and we put the newspaper to bed, and then we went out to a bar in Palo Alto before there were any nice bars in Palo Alto, and we had this late-night conversation scribbling on a cocktail napkin about what this could mean for us. What would happen once we can have video and text on the same screen? What if we could combine the immediacy of broadcast journalism with the in-depth reporting of print media? What would that do to journalism? What would that do to our audience? How would it change our relationship? And we got so excited by this idea on this cocktail napkin that we decided to pursue it. And we got technology grants from Apple and Adobe. And over the course of the next 6 months or so, we built what I reasonably still believe to be the first multimedia publication. It was built in HyperCard. It was distributed over the campus computer network because the web actually had just been invented and none of us had heard of it yet. And our first issue actually featured the Stanford 1992 Olympians. So it had these sort of in-depth interviews, feature-length interviews, along with video clips of them swimming and running. And from there, I was just hooked on the notion of invention. So I scrapped the idea of being a journalist per se. I wanted to kind of go down this road toward a career that combined media and technology. And the career actually began by bartending at a sports bar because there were no careers in media and technology at the time. But around a year later, I was really lucky to begin work with Wired magazine, but with their web company, Hotwired. Hotwired.com launched in 1994. It was sort of the first professional content site. We introduced the ad banner, and I'm sorry about that still. But it was 6 really just inspiring, fast-paced, inventive years here through the dot-com era. But then I was debating whether to tell this, and I think I will. In 2000, I actually decided to leave the industry because at that moment, at the height of the boom, I felt that everything that was happening here really only revolved around 2 things: money or technology for technology's sake. And I didn't object to either of those, but it wasn't what lit me up. I really love media and storytelling and creativity and human connection, and I didn't see a place for myself at that time. Fast forward a few years later, I joined TED in a non-technology role, but I soon found myself pulled back into technology in its current form, as you'll see as I begin talking about TED. So, turning our attention to TED, I just wanted to start by asking you, how many people in the room have watched a TED Talk before? So, almost everyone, maybe 90%. How many have been to a TED event? Small number, maybe 10%, handful of people. So I wanted to just share with you a little bit about the backstory of TED for those, just for your information. So TED actually began in 1984 as a conference that focused on technology, entertainment, and design. That's the TED in TED. But over the years, it grew ever broader, and it now focuses on anyone with an idea worth spreading, from architects to entrepreneurs, philosophers, philanthropists, photographers. Each speaker is given exactly 18 minutes on stage to give their talk or their lives, no pressure. And then each of those talks is recorded. Now, for the first 22 years, TED was a completely closed system. It was an elite, expensive event, and what happened at TED stayed at TED. But all of that began to change in the early 2000s when TED's new owner, Chris Anderson, decided that the ideas on the TED stage deserved a wider audience. And we began thinking about how would we bring them out to the world. And that was a really interesting moment in technology. Online video is just taking off. YouTube had just launched. The video iPod had just come out. And so in 2006, we launched TEDTalks for the first time, the podcast series that brought the videos from TED, the talks from TED, out to the world for free. Now, when we first launched, it was not at all clear that there was going to be any audience for what were essentially taped lectures. Taped lectures didn't scream sort of big idea to anyone. But we thought that they'd find a small audience. We thought they'd find sort of a small, geeky audience, sort of people like me and probably like you who loved school and loved lectures, and that we would gravitate toward it. But what has happened since has been really astonishing to us. So in the last 5 years, we now have 950 talks online, and they've been watched 450 million times worldwide. So, and these numbers still kind of humble and astonish us. How do you account for that? Well, for one thing, we think, actually, as it turns out, people really love to learn. There is this misconception, I think this myth in popular culture and in mass media, that in order for something to succeed, you have to dumb it down. Well, it turns out that actually people sometimes really love to stretch up. When it's a great piece of content that's delivered in a way that's intelligent but that they can understand, it draws them in. There's a hunger in the world for this kind of learning and for this kind of meaning that we feel that we're witnessing on a wide scale. So now, there's this great line from Field of Dreams, sort of, if you build it, they will come. And it's a lie, actually. That's not true. It's terrible, terrible advice. If you want anything to succeed in the world, you really have to put some strategy behind it. And what I want to share with you now is what we think are some of the key things that really help TED Talks spread, because there's so much humanist thinking behind it. So the first thing we did was hire a filmmaker. This is actually Jason Wishnow, class of 96, BA Film, MA History. And what Jason knew instinctively, he instinctively knew what he was up against. And that's that conventional wisdom tells you that no matter how good a talk is on stage, you cannot capture it on film. Something is always going to be lost in translation. But we really believe that if we applied some just solid filmmaking techniques, that we'd be able to capture the magic that we saw in these talks. And so we set about changing the way we approach the conference itself. I'm missing a slide there. Am I? No, there it is. We added new lighting. We added better sound. We began shooting on multiple cameras so that we could piece together a dynamic edit. But it wasn't enough for the talks to succeed on film. They also had to work on the 2-inch screen through which most of our viewers are seeing it. So we did things like really emphasize tight shots of the speakers so that they could reach their audience emotionally, even though they were staring through this really tiny portal. The other thing with TED Talks is that they start strong, and you may have noticed this. We actually cut out the introduction, the host introducing the speaker. We actually even cut out the speaker's own introductory remarks, the hello, thank you, Chris, it's so great to be here. We cut out their opening jokes, which they sometimes object to. We start where their talk really took off. And the reason we do that is very explicit. It's because people online are exquisitely vulnerable to distraction. So if you make them wait even a moment or two, they're going to start a search, they're going to start an email, and they're gone. They don't mean to be, but they just get distracted, and we try to really help them focus. The other thing we do is pay attention to language. So every decision that a person takes online, from what to click on to what to buy to what to watch, is driven by words, and we choose them really carefully. So we really try to convey our speakers' ideas with clarity and vitality and sort of short bursts of words that avoid jargon. So jargon is the fastest way to put a distance or a barrier between you and the intelligent general audience that wants to learn what you're bringing to them. Since our goal was spreading ideas, we felt it was really important from the beginning to embrace open models, and in a very broad way. So not only releasing the talks for free, but also releasing them in a way that surrendered a bit of our control in service of allowing them to spread farther. So we released the talks under a Creative Commons license, for example, which allowed people to reuse them in a non-commercial context without ever asking us permission. Whoops. And when you're because we're looking at such a diversity of goals and how we brought the talks to the world, I've always believed it's really important to have a diverse team behind that. So this is the wonderful media and digital team at TED, who I'm extremely grateful to. Interestingly, there was an earlier speaker, and I'm forgetting who it was, who advised for tech startups anywhere, tech companies, that they should just sort of salt their company with sort of 5% liberal arts majors, and they're more of the stake at TED. I think 95% of our team came from, had academic backgrounds in history, philosophy, linguistics. Interestingly, we have a writer who has, I think, a PhD in physics, and then we have an engineer who with a master's in linguistics. So it's people who are deep polymaths who are drawn to TED, not surprisingly. Oops, sorry. I clicked ahead too fast. So what I want to share with you now is just an example of one of the most viral TED Talks in our history. It's Hans Rosling, who is a a Swedish professor of global health, who uses statistics to explain the developing world. He's a very unlikely internet rock star. In this clip I'm about to show you, he is going to be explaining to us the gap between the developing world and the West. I think we want to bring the house lights down just a bit if we can.
Every bubble here is a country. This country over here.
Can you hear them? Or is it just my laptop?
This is China.
Could we give that another try? We can always come back to it if not. Again?
Every bubble here is a...
Your laptop's volume.
My laptop volume. Interesting. But I don't think the sound is coming to the room.
Every bubble here is a country. This
No.
country over here is...
You can hear it, but I don't think they can hear it.
China. This is India. The size of the bubble is the population. And on this axis here, I put fertility rate. Because my students...
I'm actually going to take it back only because I do want you to hear the beginning. Let's try that again.
Every bubble here is a country. This country over here is... this is China. This is India. The size of the bubble is the population. And on this axis here, I put fertility rate. Because my students, what they said when they looked upon the world, and I asked them, what do you really think about the world? Huh? Well, I first discovered that the textbook was Tintin mainly. And they said the world is still we and them. And we is Western world, and them is third world. And what do you mean with Western world? I said, well, that's long life in small family, and third world is short life in large family. So this is what I could display here. I put fertility rate here, number of children per woman, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to about 8 children per woman. We have very good data since 1962, 1960 about, on the size of families in all countries. The error margin is narrow. Here I put life expectancy at birth, from 30 years in some countries up to about 70 years. And 1962, there was really a group of countries here that was industrialized countries, and they had small families, and long lives. And these were the developing countries. They had large families, and they had relatively short lives. Now, what has happened since 1962? We want to see the change. Are the students right? It's still two types of countries? Or have these developing countries got smaller families and they live here? Or have they got longer lives and live up there? Let's see. We stop the world. And this is all UN statistic that has been available. Here we go. Can you see there? It's China. They're moving against better health. They're improving there. All the green Latin American countries, they are moving towards smaller families. The yellow ones here are the Arabic countries, and they get larger families, but longer lives, but not larger families. The Africans are the green down here. They still remain here. This is India. Indonesia is moving on pretty fast. And in the 80s here, you have Bangladesh still among the African countries there. But now Bangladesh, it's a miracle that happens in the 80s. The imams start to promote family planning, and they move up into that corner. And in 90s, we have the terrible HIV epidemic that takes down the life expectancy of the African countries, and all the rest of the world moves up into the corner where we have long lives and small family, and we have a completely new world.
So that talk has been watched many millions of times online, and the reason and viral, I think, is, for one thing, it changes the way you think. It gives you this aha moment. It also shows you something in a way you've never seen before. It surprises you, and it also touches you. You know, when you see the African country sink, your stomach sinks with it. And all of these are contagious emotions. They make you want to share the experience you're having, and that drive to share is what drives virality online. Now, the other perhaps secret behind the spread of TED Talks is perhaps the oldest trick in the book: good old-fashioned human storytelling. So every TED Talk features a single passionate presenter telling you their story. And in many ways, that's the most ancient form of media. We evolve to respond to somebody who is telling us a story. And when you're in the presence of a powerful storyteller, you respond not just on an intellectual level, but on an emotional level. And I'd argue even on a physical level. It's a really powerful response, and one that is inherently social. Again, that's an experience that you want to share with others. Having slightly odd slide behavior. That slide did say goal, spread ideas. So when your goal is to spread ideas, or excuse me, it's important for me to note for you that when we first put the TED Talks online, we had one single goal in mind. We were not trying to sell tickets to the conference. It was already sold out. We were actually hoping it might relieve some of the pressure. We weren't trying to make money, and we weren't trying to build the brand. We had one explicit goal, which was to spread ideas. Now, when your goal is spreading ideas, though, at a certain point, we realized that we were running up against the limit of who we could reach because we were only speaking in English. So 2 years ago, we launched the TED Open Translation Project, which allows volunteers around the world to subtitle talks into their own language. Now, we launched this with modest goals, but have been just amazed and humbled at what's happened since. So we now have 6,000 translators who produced 18,000 translations in 81 languages. These are all volunteer translators who are unpaid. These are the top 20 talks on our website. Every single one of these languages has at least 400 talks available. Many of them have 900 or more. We've actually run out of talks in the most popular languages. Our translators don't have anything to do. You might be wondering at some of the languages up there, for example, Bulgarian. Only 9 million people in the world speak Bulgarian, but 10 of them are really big TED fans. And that's quite typical in many of the languages. So, for example, in Arabic, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to one translator, Anwar Dafa Allah. He's a Muslim and a Sudanese. He's living in South Korea, and he's single-handedly translated more than 500 talks into Arabic. Now, excuse me. I wanted to quickly show you how the subtitles play out on the site for those of you who may not have tried them before. So this is Hans Rosling's TED Talk, which is subtitled in English, as all of our talks are. That pull-down menu provides all of the languages it's available, and so you can see we're changing between different languages. That's Hindi, reading right to left for extra bonus points, Arabic, Tamil, and so on. We also have on the, as you see that the headline changes along with the subtitles when you go into it, we also have a transcript that accompanies the talk. It has the full transcript of the talk that you can toggle into each language. You can click anywhere in the transcript and it'll jump to that point in the video. The transcript actually toggles separately from the subtitles, so it creates what we like to think of as a sort of Rosetta Stone effect. You could watch a talk in English with Thai subtitles and an Urdu transcript and get this sort of three-way translation. Really, you can. Now, this project was extremely challenging from a technical point of view, simply because we were trying to solve problems that nobody else seems to care about. No one else is trying to toggle between 80 different languages with 20 different scripts on the fly online. But we all agree in the company that the technical challenges actually pale in comparison to the human challenges that came along with launching this. How do you create a program with volunteer translators that actually ensures really great work? You know, it's one thing to theoretically believe in the power of the wisdom of crowds or the power of crowdsourcing, and it's entirely different thing to trust your own content to the hands of a translator you don't know speaking a language you don't understand. That really takes a leap of faith. And we spent a lot of time thinking about how we ensure quality and came up with a number of principles I thought I'd share with you because I think for this audience they might be interesting. The first thing is that we view the translation of a TED Talk more like poetry than an encyclopedia entry. A classic technologist question that I'd field was, well, did you consider machine translation? No, we didn't. Maybe 20, 30, 40 years from now, but probably not even then. I mean, translating a TED Talk, you're translating one person's words. It's more like translating Proust than it is like translating just an encyclopedia entry. So we really approached it that way. We require 2 translators on every talk. One translates the entire talk to get a consistency of voice. Then a reviewer reviews it to make sure to provide those checks and balances. It's a classic sort of writer-editor relationship. It also helps to create a context in which we can introduce languages that we don't know because the community kind of polices itself. We also create some barriers to entry. We don't just let anybody kind of jump in and start translating. You don't want them to be too steep, but you want to have some barriers to ensure that the people who step in are serious about their work. In fact, most of our translators are professional translators in their regular lives. We also provide clear guidelines, which is really essential anytime you're working on a distributed program. Guidelines on what kind of translation we expect, guidelines on how to work with your fellow translator who we expect you to collaborate with. And we hear from translators, they come back to the guidelines again and again when they need some help with a tricky issue. And finally, we try to make our translators rock stars. So every time they translate something, their name and a link to their profile page appears along with the talk. This gives them credit for their work and incents them to do their best translation possible, and it also holds them accountable if they don't. Now, and I should add at this point that one of the really stunning and sort of wonderful things that we've observed over the last 2 years is that we actually haven't had, in the course of 18,000 translations, we haven't had a single instance of somebody submitting a mischievous translation, a purposely mistranslated translation, which was, of course, the only thing we thought about at the beginning is what do we do when this happens? And, of course, it actually hasn't happened because people care so deeply about these speaker words, they want to do their best job possible. Now, we're really finding throughout all of our work a very similar phenomenon happening with our TEDx program. So TEDx is a program we launched also 2 years ago. It allows individuals and organizations around the world to hold their own TED-like events. So there's now a TEDx Tokyo, a TEDx Sydney, a TEDx Silicon Valley. We don't charge them for the organizers for the license, and in return they can only charge a nominal amount for the events that they organize. We launched it with very modest goals. We expected to find a couple of dozen events or producers who were interested in holding events. And in fact, what has happened over the last 2 years is that there are now 1,500 TEDx events held in 98 countries in 35 languages. And we've just been astonished with what's coming out of these events. In setting up this program, similar with the translation program, we came up with a lot of guidelines, a lot of ideas about how to get good work out of this group, how to help them to create the best TED event possible. And what's happened since has really astonished us. So many these images will scroll by. Each of these are an event held around the world. And we are amazed at just the professionalism and the creativity that are going into these events, which range from events in beautiful 1,000-person halls to ones that this is an event in the Kibera in the slums of Nairobi, to ones that are in rural villages in India, to the depths of the Amazon rainforest, to the Great Wall of China. And so in the end, while we spent a lot of time setting up guidelines to make sure that they could create a TED quality event, we find we're now learning from them. So we're constantly watching their web streams and learning from them, elbowing each other, saying, did you see what they did? That's a great speaker. Those are great videos. It's helped us to really up our game and to continually learn as an organization. Interestingly, at this point, we put one new TED Talk onto TED.com every day, and at this point, 20% of the talks that we publish actually come from the TEDx events around the world. And next month, we'll reach an exciting milestone. We're going to put up the first TED Talk that was filmed in a different language. So this was filmed at a TEDx event in Mexico, and we're going to be running it along with the regular TED Talks with English subtitles for our international audience. And so this is one of the outcomes that we didn't expect at the beginning, but has really stunned us, that we can now find the best ideas from speakers all around the world that we never would have had access to if we didn't have this really open network. So throughout all of this, TED has really been pursuing what we've called our philosophy of radical openness. And we call it radical because it makes other people extremely nervous for us. Like, you're giving away your brand. And it's made us nervous too. But what interests us about it is that for all our planning around the supposedly risky strategy of openness, all of the unintended consequences have been explosively positive. And chief among them is that our global audience has now become a global team. So we're a very small organization and a nonprofit at that, but we have thousands of people around the world who are now helping us to advance our mission, to have 18,000 translations, to have events and speakers in dozens of languages. That could only happen in a multi-million-dollar corporation 10 years ago. And it's so interesting to watch what's evolved now. So I hope over the last 18 minutes, I've shared with you some of the wonder that I feel every day in watching the potential that's unleashed when humanities and technology meet. So from our vantage point at TED, we're seeing the way people worldwide are embracing this notion of sharing ideas. We're watching technology reinvigorate the ancient art of the spoken word. We're seeing the power of open systems, and we're watching as technology enables the fastest and deepest exchange of ideas in the history of humanity. So this is an exciting moment. And I hope I can convince some of you here who are students of the humanities, experts in the humanities, to embrace technology as your collaborator, as your creative partner, and to see what you can accomplish together. Because only you can imagine what technology can do, what problems it might solve, what questions it might answer. Only you can picture the form that technology might take, or the impact that could have in the field that makes your hearts flutter. Technology needs people. It needs people who are experts in history and language and poetry and philosophy. And it needs people who understand humanity's greatest gifts and greatest potential. And we need you to tame and tailor technology so that we can, preserve humanity's greatest legacies and reach our loftiest goals. Technology needs you. Thank you.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.